All right, so this is the continuation of our week 4 lectures, and we talked about a few important things in last class. Today we will be just talking about some of the other concepts. So you remember we have talked about a few things. We have worked on Express, and we know that how to set up an Express server now. And also we know that we can set up Nodemon to run our program. And of course, our server is now continuously running in the background. And so we have to now discuss some of the interesting topics. So, and also we have talked about this static in my last lecture. If you have seen that lecture before this one, the part 1 of today's lecture. So after that, today we'll be starting middleware, and that middleware is a very interesting concept, very important concept in Express, and it usually gives us this power of doing something in between the request and response. So what are the different things that you might be doing between request and response is that you might have a database that you want to access, you want to have some files, or you want to do something, you want to have some data, etc., etc. There are lots of things that you want to do in between your, like, in between your request and the response. So to understand that concept, let's first discuss the definition of it. Middleware is in Express refers to the function that can execute in middle of a request. So middle of a request response cycle. So basically, as I said, that it would be running in between the request response cycle in between that. So typically before a matching route function is executed. So again, this is a very important point again here, that before a matching route function is executed. So middleware can run at multiple places. From here, we can see that one of the place can be, of course, an independent middleware, not dependent on any particular route that can run. And there might be some of the middlewares that would be depending upon some of the specific routes. So if we do that typical route, that middleware will run. So so from the Express documentation, middleware functions are functions that have access to the request object, the response object, and the next function. So something that will be added to our middleware function, middleware, is this next function in the application's request response cycle. The next function is a function in Express router, which when invoked executes the middleware succeeding the current middleware. So now that's a very interesting part. The next function typically does what? That you are done with something and you want to just, now you want to access something else. Now you want to just execute something else. So this next function will be helping us in that out. And we'll see an example shortly. So first of all, a middleware function will be effectively, it will be accepting 3 parameters: the request object, REQ, as previously we have done that, response, RES, we have done that. There is something new which is next. As I said, that this would be passed as a function, and then we will be calling this function once the middleware's job is done. So whenever the job is done for the middleware, we'll be calling that next function. So you see here is a function in the Express router, which when invoked executes the middleware succeeding the current middleware. So whatever you have been done and you want to have the next middleware, you have that next function being called. You will be calling that next function. So there are 5 types of middlewares. We'll be talking about a few of them today. Application middleware, application level middleware is bound to your entire application, can run when every request comes in, or when only it matches a specifier. Example in the document. So again, so see here that application level middleware is bound to your entire application. As I said, a sort of global scope. For a middleware, if you say that it's of a global scope, that means that you're talking about that that middleware will always execute before every get request or every request that has been made. So again, it's bound to your entire application, means as a global scope of sort, and can run when every request comes in. So you see here, when every request comes in. So if it is bound to your entire application, as I said in the beginning, so it would be running before every other request. So that means if I have like 4 gets in my application, so from before every application, like, let me just show you over here. So we have got, this app.get, app.get, app.get. So what we are effectively saying that if your middleware is defined as a global scope for entire application, that will run virtually, not virtually, specifically before every get request. So if I go to the route, middleware will execute. If that is again global level. If I go to this about page, middleware will execute. If I go to this parametric about page, middleware will execute. So if it is defined in an entire application scope, it would be running when every request comes in. So whenever a request comes in, middleware will execute. Or only where it matches a specified route. So that is specific to it. So for example, I say that whenever I call whenever this route is being accessed, a middleware should execute. So that would become contextual for a particular request. So for a particular request, not particular request, particular route as well, right? So I'm saying that whenever about slash dot id, whenever I call with this one, there should be a middleware that should be executed, right? So like so. So examples, there are examples in the documentation. You can see router level middleware works the same way as application, but it's attached to a separate router instance, which means it can be applied to only a subset of all routes in your application that are under that router. So it says that it's almost the same like application, but it's attached to a separate router instance. So as I said, that it might be attached to a router reference. Let's first of all, let's quickly have a look at application level middleware, which we have just discussed. So if you see here that we have got this variable app express. Now, interestingly, we can use this use function to run our middleware. If you see here, we are saying that app.use function, we are running a function. We are asking it to use a function that has request, response, and next, and just prints out time. So whenever a request comes, it prints out date.now, it prints out the current time, and it goes to the next one, right? So it shows the example where no mount path. This function is executed every time app receives a request. So again, this will be executed every time every time a get request is accepted. So this app.use, because it has been defined as in the global scope, you will have this one will be running all the time. This example shows the middleware function mounted as user ID path. The function is executed for any type of HTTP request for this particular path, right? As I said, and as I was saying here. So if it is attached to this one, it will be only executing that particular one. So if it is like again app.use user dash ID like colon ID, so it's a dynamic ID being provided to running this function, and it has request type request.method. It will be just telling you the request method, what method has been received, and then the next function. So next function, what is this next function for? If you remember, this next function will take you to the next part of the code, whatever that part of the code is. So maybe if there is a get request, maybe something, so it will take you over there, something same like that. So one thing very important that you need to keep in mind is that you should always have this next function called in the middleware. Otherwise, you will stuck to some point, and I'll show you the example. So this example shows a route and its handler function, middleware system. The function handles get request to the user ID path. So if you see here, okay, just hold on a minute. Okay, so now this example shows a route and its handler function, middleware system, and the function handles get requests, user ID path. So I see here what we are doing is that we are using a get request, and again, this route is being attached with that get request, and this function will execute. And this function has that next, but again, please bear in mind that that we need to call this next. And why and if there is nothing after that particular route, we don't call a next. I'll give you that example. There is no next over here because of, if you see over here that what effectively we are saying we have used this app.get a lots of time, and we used to define a function over there, but with request and response. If you see, we have done this a lots of time, app.get function request response. We have never used this next. So if you can use the next over here as well, but next is used whenever you have to go to the some other part. But if you are not going to some other part, something which is the end of the route or end of something, you don't need a next. And again, as I said, I'll give you a quick example. Here is an example of loading a series of middleware functions in mount path. With a mount path, it illustrates the middleware substack that represents requests for any type of HTTP user ID path. So you see app.use user ID function request next. So you see whenever they are using this use and defining a middleware, it must have got a next associated with it. Okay, so now here we have app.use and we have got this first one and then comma, then there is other function, and which is the request type, request method, and it will also be executed. And it's also one way or other chained or maybe use two middlewares over here. So this will, if that is called, it will just go to that original URL or whatever. So route handler enables to define multiple routes for a path. The example define below two routes to get request to user ID path. The second route will not cause any problems, but it will never be called because the first route ends the request response cycle. Now you see here, this example shows a middleware substack that handles get request to user ID path. So if you see here app.get, and we are defining a function with next, and here you see that here we want it to go to some other part. That's why we are giving it next. And the other function, if you see that this function request type rest.send user info, and it is not taking somewhere else. That means after that, like whenever this function will be met, it is the end of the request. I hope that makes sense. So handler for the user ID path, which prints the user ID. So if we see that if the prints are if you want to print that app.get user ID function request response next rest.end rics.parameter.id. So again, ric.parameters and request.parameters is something that we'll be using. So for the time being, you just maybe have a slight difference, and when we'll be just running this out. Okay, now what I want to, so now there are certain examples, there are route examples, and we have this request.parameters, that we can use request.query string that we have used. Now router level middleware. Router level middleware works in the same way as the application middleware, except it bounds to an instance of express.router. So there is one instance of express.router. So if you are using an expense, like there is the reference to a router level, so that means this would be associated with a router level express.router instance. So load router level middleware by using router.use and router.method functions. So that would be followed by the router, not the app. So we are talking about a router level middleware over here. So see here, router.use ID function. So what we are doing here is that we have defined a router, express.router, and router.use. So we are defining a middleware that is router specific, because associated with the router. Router.use user ID function request next, console.request and next, and we are just again doing the same thing, but here the difference is that we are working on a router level. So a middleware substack that handle get requests. So you can see all these examples, and these are the router level examples. And then we have error handling middlewares. If you see here, error handling middleware is defined as with 4 parameters. This is very interesting, and of course we'll be using in one example as well. You must specify all 4 parameters so the Express can differentiate it from a regular. So Express handling middleware will have not 3, rather it will have 4 parameters. These 4 parameters, and these 4 parameters means that now it will be basically it will have extra parameter of ERR. So you must specify all 4 parameters so that middleware knows that this is not a normal middleware. Like an Express knows that this is not a normal middleware. Rather, it is an error handling middleware, right? So what happens is that you'll define that middleware in case error handling middleware gets called when a regular middleware function calls next error. So whenever a middleware function will call next ERR instead of next, this error handling middleware will be called, and you will be gracefully exiting out of the program, not a abrupt exit of your program. And that is something that error handling does for us. Passing next to an error object will invoke the error handler instead of the next route handler. So again, next initiates what? Next initiates the next handler, next middleware, while as next ERR initiates the error handler. So that's why if you have to call that error handler, you will just do what? Next ERR, and this ERR will be passed to this one, alongside request, response, and next, and error handle will be doing its own job. And we'll see the example, as I said. So built-in middleware, express.static serving static files. We have used that in our previous video. If you saw that, to to serve the static content, we use express.static, and express.json is used to parse incoming request with JSON payload. So if JSON is coming, we can use JSON. And express.url encoded. I hope you have used this URL encoded function before, not in Express, but in Node.js maybe, or maybe JavaScript before. But anyhow, if you have not used, we will have some examples in coming weeks. Used to parse incoming requests with URL encoded payloads, typically from the post submissions. So now we have some certain third-party middlewares. That's a too much talk. Let's talk about some of the middlewares in general. So first, I will just come here, and it's the same application. And let me just show you that it's running, and it is basically. If you remember, we have got this one. This program is running and Express with Nodemon, and this is from the last video that I just prepared for you people. Now, what I have to do. So before this, even the first get, I am coming here. After my lesson, I've come here, and I want to define maybe a middleware for. Let me tell you one thing, as we have discussed, and I can just tell you, all these get requests also have something called a next, which is not visible, which is not used over here. This next function is also used with that. But again, we'll take that example shortly. So before that, let's try to make a function over here and call it maybe logging in, for example. So, or maybe log console. Right. So I'm just calling this as, so it will accept, of course, request, it will accept response, it will accept next. So what I'm doing is that I'm trying to create a middleware function. And what it is doing is, again, we just want to see the functionality first. So it will be just logging something in our I am middleware. Or maybe I should call it I'm middleware 1, right? Or maybe let's write its purpose as well, for logging in console. Anyhow, anything. Now the most important thing, that whenever you're writing a middleware, you should always write a next after that. Why? Because we want it to basically pass its control to the others. Okay. Now I've defined that, and as you saw that we have two methods. Like in examples we have seen that we were using that app.use and we're defining the function over there. But what we can do over here is that we can just define this, and we can use this function only, log console. Right? So I'm using the other method. So what you can do is you can even do that app.use, and you can define a function, as we have seen in our examples in that documentation that it is using. So you can use both of the methods. If you see here, app.use function, and then you can define a function over here. So that's up to you. This is your choice, but I'm just using that because I want you to just give some function examples here. Right? So I've defined this as a function. I've defined a separate function, and then I've called that function by using this app.use console. And let's see what happens to our program. Okay, I'm expecting that my page is running, and it says server running. And now let's go to our page and run this page. I've run that page. Now let's see what has happened. You see here, I'm middleware 1 for logging in console, and it says new log. And okay, so why it's saying new log? I just forgot that I mentioned this at that root route, our root route which is there. So we have this. So what is this? I am middleware 1 for logging in console. Or maybe just look at this one, server running. I am middleware 1 for logging in console, new log. And let's come back here and talk about any other route. Let's access about, which is the about page. So I've accessed the about page. I'm telling you explicitly because I want to show you something. 20, and now I've accessed this with a parameter. Now let's come over here and see what has happened. you see that for the first time when I access my page, it says I am middleware 1 for logging into console. I'm logging something in console. New log was coming from this one. I will just close that one, but let's, because now right now I've run that, so I want to show you. Okay, and then just make it a big so that we can just see. And then after this new log, if you see, I am middleware 1 for logging in console, I am middleware 1 for logging in console. Why is that happening? I hope you remember. We've talked about that now, since this middleware has been made as a global scope. Global scope means overall the program. It's basically inside overall program. Where is that gone? Yes. So overall program, and I'm using it for overall program. So before any get request, it would execute. So every get request, before every get request, it will be executing. So if I just keep on getting, like, requesting and getting, so you will see that my console will be populated with all these calls. Why? And you see, whenever I call home, it brings up this new log from home, right? And then, so again, effectively this middleware is always running whenever you are making a get request to the server. So that is a general concept related to the middleware, that middleware specifically runs before every request, again, as we said, and if it has been defined as a global scope. So again, in a global scope, it will be running all the time. So let's talk about another middleware, and let me just define another function. So I'm just using it, another function I'm just defining, and maybe I'm calling it, you can call whatever. So I'm calling it authorization maybe, or authorizing. So request, response, and next. Right. So we are defining another middleware, and what it is doing is that it says I am middleware 2 for authorization or authorizing, whatever. And as I said, never forget to mention that next as well. Right. And I want to associate this authorizing middleware to a particular route. Right. I want it to run with a particular route. Right. If you people are getting this concept of this. Okay. So let's do one thing, and let's run this one with our about. So again, I'll come here and I'll say authorizing. So now, if I name that authorizing correctly, authorizing, yes, authorizing. Now I've just done what? I'm calling this middleware now with a particular route, not with everyone, right? So I've saved this, and let's see if my server is of course running, and server is running, of course. Now let's go back to this one and run this. So we have run our home, like, the basic route. Okay. So I've refreshed it. So it says I am middleware in middleware 1 for logging in. And why it is not logging the new log? Have I just stopped that new log? And oh, sorry, it was a bit slow. So server running, and when I have hit home twice, so you see I am middleware 1. So middleware 1 is running again, and then new log is coming from my application, my main route. And then I am middleware 1 for logging in console, new log. So I have clicked home twice. Now let's talk about this about. I'm clicking this about. Now see here what happens. It's going a bit slow. It's going very slow because it should see here. So see here what happens. It says I am middleware 1 for logging in console. So what is this middleware? This is the middleware 1 that we created, that is, in global in scope, and which has to run before every get request. This is the first middleware. And if you talk about the second one, I'm middleware 2 for authorizing. So this authorizing is only running when I am calling this about page. And if I go about route, and if I go to this particular route about us in 20 or whatever, we have used that before. Let's see what it shows, because it's showing very slowly. Let me just refresh it. Can't say it has just updated or not. Okay, so looks like it has just updated. So it was called 2 for about route, and now I've accessed this about with 20, about with 20 value. So now it is not updating. So let's do one thing. Let's do one more thing, and we will know the difference. I'm calling the home again, and let's see what happens here. It's getting very slow. I'm sorry about that. So see here. So middleware 2 was run for that particular, about route, and then I accessed about with a 20, and this says that only the top middleware, the first middleware is run. And if you talk about the like when I again access the home, you see that home is coming up with the first one and then new log. And again, if I want to see that authorizing running, so I will have to go to about again. If I go to about, and again, let's wait for it updates that. So you see here, I'm middleware 1 for logging in console, and I'm middleware 2 for authorizing. Right? I hope that is making sense to everyone. Okay. So till now we have seen that we can create these middlewares, and something interesting. If I take this, so it goes in the sequence. So one very important thing is to remember is that these middlewares go in sequence with one another. So if I just, for example, if I just use this or app define this middleware at the end, so it, like as I said, the JavaScript goes from top to bottom, and it looks for those things. So for the time being, I've done what? I've just taken my authorizing. Okay, not authorizing. I don't want to take authorizing. Rather, I want to take, for example, my middleware 1. So this is my middleware 1. Let me just take. Just hold on a minute. So log console. Okay. So let's come here and take our log console from this part. So if I cut it from here, and if I paste it somewhere here, for example, right? So my middlewares, both middlewares are at the bottom. And if I want to look at them, if I run my program again, and if I see the output over here, so my server is running. Let's go back here and the home page, and I've just clicked twice or thrice to this. Let's see the difference. Now you see that server running new log, new log. My middleware is not running over here. And why it is not running? Because the code is not reaching to this point. So what I was saying in the beginning, if you see that, as I said, that next is basically with all these things over here. Like again, here is a technically a next over here. Let's place this next over here and try to do that. Let's see what happens after this. So I have placed the next in my main route. So the home route. Let's see what happens. I've clicked that. Let's see what happens in my. Okay, so you see here, I am middleware 1 for logging in console. So now what is happening? I hope you understand that this next is basically available to every function. So there is every function that we run with the get request is basically a middleware, but since we don't have anything to go after that, so we do what? We do not use this next with our main functions. I hope that is making sense to everyone, right? And you see that I've defined this authorizing at the bottom. Let's see if that authorizing is working or not. Oh, I'm sorry. I've just terminated the server for some reason. Okay, so now my server is running again, and let's see if that happens or not. If I go to about page, about section, let's see if that logs in or not. Okay, so that runs, and why does it run? Okay, authorizing is running, even though authorizing is also defined at the bottom. Oh, okay, just hold on. Let me just take out this next from here, and see if it works. It should not work, by the way, but if it is working, that's a surprising thing. So I've received it, like server is running. Now let's go back to our main. This is our main, and if I access this main, I've clicked this multiple times. Let's see if my terminal gets updated. Oh, so that is not running because I said that that middleware, because I've taken out the next, so that won't be running, right? So now let's talk about the about, and I go to about, run that. Okay, I'm middleware. So this middleware, since it has been called in this this app.get, so it gets its definition and it's running, even though it has been defined somewhere at the bottom. And you know why? Because I am calling it from this app.get. This route is basically calling it. So just take out this route from here, and let's try to make that authorizing as also as a global middleware. And I'm using that use and authorizing. And you know that now it should not be called by anything. Why? Because now let's see server running, and let me just go to the home. Of course, not even middleware 1 or middleware 2. Both of them will not execute. So server, it's not showing. So server should show new log, server running and new log. And again, as you see that if I even access about, because I'm not calling that middleware from here now, so it does, that middleware will not be called. Rather, you will have only nothing will show up, because this new log is coming from what? Our server, and like our main route, and nothing will happen. So so two things that we need to discuss over here, need to see here, that we have made that as a global as well. But again, what we have done, we have just used, or we have just defined that at the bottom. We have just defined that at the bottom of it. So basically, I don't want that. I want to call that with my about route, for example. So you can call it with anyone. Authorizing. Now this will work, and not only this will work, but let's take that log console also at the top, so that it also works for us. So I'm taking this function also at the top after this app.listen maybe. And now this is now everything should be working. Server is running, and if I just run this one, first this, and then this about, and then about with a parametric value, and let's see what has happened to our console. I need to update that. Okay, so see here, this one. See here, server running. I'm middleware 1, like for logging in for our home page, new log, and then I'm middleware 1. I've just clicked twice, refreshed my face, my main route twice, the home page, and then I'm middleware 1 for logging in console. And when I went to about, it accessed like this middleware 1, which is global for everything, and then it has accessed middleware 2, which is specific for authorizing.